Morning. We all right? Tuesday morning. 2 hours of data. What more could you ask for? What more could you ask for? As Beth said, I'm Scott Hartley. I'm the director of a company called PressRed. 6 or 7 of us based in different parts of the country, and our little niche is really trying to understand physical activity behaviour and how we shift it at a population level. That's what we're into. We spend a lot of time looking at spreadsheets and information. I love it. You love it, right? We all love it. Yeah, that's the right. Okay, I'm going to try and bring some of that information to life for you today. Active lives data, census data, there's a number of different things. And I'll explain things as we go along. But it's probably worth saying up front, if there's something that you're not getting your head around, either on the screen or in what I'm saying, just stop me and ask. Okay, if it's a long answer, we'll park it. And if it's a hard, and I'll answer it break or lunchtime. If it's a hard answer, we'll park it and I'll try and leave before you catch me again. Okay? If it's an easy answer, I'll deal with it in the moment. Okay? That's how we're going to try and work with this today. A little bit more about our company. We work with 10 active partnerships in a quite kind of close relationship like we have with GM Moving. They're all across the country. We get people together sometimes in London and get you all sharing experiences and your work with each other, which is quite interesting and exciting. So we get to see this data from a range of different places. So I'll try and bring some of that in as I go along today, just where it stands out, where I think it's intriguing. And just help you to kind of put it into perspective and think it through a little bit. I just thought I'd say a little bit about our journey together. Okay, as Beth said, it started around 2017. Matt Johnson, if any of you have been around that long will remember Matt. He asked us to do a little bit of work digging into active lives data because he'd heard that we were doing some of that stuff in other parts of the country. And so we started, and if I remember rightly, the first slide deck was about 130 slides. And we painstakingly took Matt through every single one of them. Okay, just trying to get this information out and think about it and think about how it's relevant to our work. And then on the back of that, we did some work about the LDP, the local delivery pilot, was just starting to emerge. That investment was just starting to emerge from Sport England. And we did some work around 3 groups of people. People experience worklessness or at risk of doing so, children and young people, especially in the community outside of school hours, and then people with a limited illness or disability. There was these 3 cohorts that had been identified by population health that we should try and focus that investment on. So we did a bit of data analysis and a bit of desk research about them. And then we were part of an evaluation of the first GM Moving blueprint. And we used a tool called revaluation that some of you might have come across, which led to if I get this right, the pointers for leadership practices, those pointers for leadership practice came out of that evaluation. And we did various bits and pieces with you over the years. We covered Hazel's maternity cover in 2020, if I remember rightly. So you can just see as we've kind of done these different moments in time where we've helped you with the data or helped you with the thinking around the evidence. The last 3 little PressRed logos on there are just reflecting the locality workshops that we've been doing with you we've done 3 rounds of them over the last 4 years or so, okay? And this is where we've taken the data and me and plonked me in a room of a different group of local partners in each of the localities to try and bring the information to life, get them thinking about it, get partners thinking about how they use this information to inform their decision making. Okay, and those workshops have looked quite different in each year. And I'm just going to say a little bit about that before I get us into the information a little bit. We've done around 8 workshops each round, so 3 rounds, about 8 workshops in each of the 3 rounds, and each time there've been a different set of localities, but there have been some common ones that have had 3 workshops. One in every Bolton, for example, I think is one area that have had a workshop every year. Okay, so it's been a mix of localities every time we've done this, and what I've noticed is just how they've changed. Okay, there's been more partners certainly involved in this last round, considerably more partners. The average this time round, probably around 25 people. Richard, Nicole's, probably that's about a fair reflection, whereas the average the first time round was probably about 6, 8 maybe. So you can just see how local partners have maybe got a bit more comfortable with hearing this information, and then have brought other people into the conversation so that they could hear it. So we've got more people now thinking about this information. We've also started to design these workshops in a way. I would say to begin with, it was me on a soapbox ranting at people, which is what I'm going to do to you today. Aren't you lucky? Me ranting at you about active lives data. No, they were pretty much like that. They were me broadcasting, basically. But now they're a little bit more of a workshop. We stop, we break down. People are getting a bit more comfortable thinking about this data a bit more in the moment and reflecting on what does it mean to my practice? What does it mean to our work? If I'm hearing that and that's the patterns we're seeing in our population, then what do we need to be thinking about? We've got that kind of change being going on. We're getting asked a lot better questions now. We're getting people asking us, some brilliant ones in Wigan not so long ago of, I'm working on active travel. What can I take from this for my work around active travel that I need to be thinking about the way that we go about doing it? Okay, so people are starting to connect the information to thinking their work through, which I think is a real positive from this. And that, the really good bit for me is the localities, the local authorities in the main have got more involved in shaping the workshops to what they need. Okay, so if you the reason why I'm mentioning this, somewhere in your vault of information, there's a pack for each of the 8 localities that we've done these workshops for recently. And those packs will be slightly different. And the reason why they're slightly different is because the localities told us what they wanted us to pick at in the data to help them think about their work. So there's some nuance in each of those packs. So they're not the same in every locality. Okay, so just when you get the time, if you're working in a particular locality, it's worth asking Hazel whether there's a pack for it, because it'll help you think about what's going on there. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to use some of that information from those packs to just show you some of the patterns and trends across GM. And I've got some GM data in here as well, but at times I'm going to be flicking through GM data, locality data, and I'll show you when we get onto a couple of slides what to watch out for, so you know what locality that you're looking at. I'm going to start with this. This is where Richard groans, because he's heard my story about this numerous, and Nicole can start. I'm going cricket, Richard. I'm sorry, I'm going cricket. Sorry? You can do it for me. I said you could do it for me if you wanted to. Do you recognize this diagram? Yeah. The onion, right? This is the onion, the socio-ecological model around how we can shift population level behavior, okay? That's its one way of describing it. I'm going to describe it in another way in a minute. But I'm going to try and bring it to life first through the medium of cricket. I've chosen cricket because it's my favorite sport, okay? And so in the middle of this is my individual capability, motivations, opportunities, my beliefs about cricket. I love it, okay? It is by far the best sport ever created. I'm not going to argue about that with anyone. It just is. Okay, so I am really motivated and I was really motivated as a kid to want to play cricket and get better at it. I really was, okay? Why did I get into cricket? If you've heard this before, you're not allowed to answer any of my questions. That's the first rule. Why did I get into cricket? Family members. Who? I know it's hard to believe, but I was born in the early to mid-70s. Who introduced me to cricket? Parents. Specifically, who would have been playing cricket? My dad. Okay, my dad introduced me to cricket. Why did my dad introduce me to cricket?
He wanted you to follow in his footsteps.
Because he knew how to play it. Okay. Who introduced him to cricket? His dad. Okay. We've got 2 generations now, 3 generations playing cricket. I have an older brother and an older sister. One of those played cricket, one of them didn't. Which one played? My brother. What did my sister do? Made the teas with my mum. It was the early 80s. That was how cricket was designed. That's what your experience of cricket was. We'd all go down to the cricket club. Me, my brother and my dad would play. My mum and my sister would make the tea. Okay, that's how it was. Okay, what you're hearing now? Well, you're hearing my dad's individual motivations in the middle. You're hearing the relationships, the social network around us. okay, you're starting to hear cricket club. Okay, that's where I first got introduced to cricket, was my dad taking me down to the cricket club because he was playing cricket there. Okay, so you're starting to hear the institutions and organisations, you're starting to hear the built environment, green space, cricket ground, cricket wicket, etc., etc. We'll come to the rules and the other bits in a minute, but I'm going to the top first, cultural norms and ideologies. What are you hearing about that?
It's just the way it was.
My dad's norm was playing cricket. So he passed it on to his sons because it was the norm to pass it on to male members in your family. He didn't pass it on to my sister. Okay? Because that wasn't what women did in the early 80s. Cricket club didn't offer anything, didn't offer any women's teams. There was no cricket provision for women at the cricket club back then. Okay? The cultural norm was to pass it down to the male member of the family, me, or me and my brother. I have a wife and 2 children. My children are male and female. In my family, who plays cricket?
Both.
This is my greatest achievement. All of them. All of them. My wife plays cricket, and my daughter and my son play cricket. Why?
Because you encouraged it.
Yeah, but what else has changed? What's changed in the cultural norm since the mid-80s and 40 years later? Get your head around that bit. The mid-2020s. What's changed?
It's a provision.
Better provision. Cricket clubs offer opportunities for women and girls now. Certainly my local cricket club does. What else has changed?
Perceptions.
Go to the outside layer. It's much more culturally normal for women and girls to play sport now than it was 40 years ago. Significantly different. Think of football, think of cricket, think of rugby, think of all of those sports that have been male-dominated for hundreds of years that are slowly, 40 years, by the way, changing. Okay? And that's how long population-level outcomes can take to change, because the cultural norm of the acceptability of cricket, and then the provision has changed and the policy has changed, right? All of a sudden, the ECB, what do they start to do? They're not just spending money on the men's game, they're spending money on the women's game. What does that create? It creates opportunity, it creates infrastructure, it creates environments. Okay? The norm around who plays cricket has shifted dramatically. But it's taken, arguably, how many years? Decades, right? And I want you to keep hold of 2 things here. Culture, and how important it is when you think about some of the data there and some of the bits that I'm going to put up. And just how long these outcomes can take to change. Okay, because they're really important things for us to keep on. Because I'm going to be talking mainly about population level data today, population level outcomes. Right. Actually, before I bring the next slide up, I've already mentioned Active Lives survey. Beth has as well. And you might be sat there thinking, what on earth is that? There's 2 surveys, one for adults over the age of 16 and one for 5 to 16-year-olds. They're delivered very differently. The adult one is a random sample, household sample process. So you might get a letter through the post that asks you to go online and fill in a form. The children and young people survey is done through schools. You'll probably know a little bit more about that because there'll be people in the room that's got a responsibility for getting that sample. Okay, and it goes out to random year groups in random schools on an annual basis. Both of these are annual surveys. They happen over the 12 months of the year, and they've got huge samples nationally, 175,000 adults and around 100,000 children and young people. At a national level, this is really big level surveys, internationally recognized as really significant surveys, okay? But they're surveys, right? Surveys have limitations, because you wouldn't believe it, but we like to exaggerate our positive behaviors and play down our negative behaviors, okay? That's a human trait that we have, okay? And you can kind of manage some of that out in this data, you know, in some of the techniques and that for the method, but it's at play, right? And how much can we remember how much we did 28 days ago? Well, if you've got a watch like mine now, and a lot of us will have, or a phone, you'll probably remember it a lot better than we used to. But it's not perfect, Okay, no measurement process is perfect though, and it's pretty gold. The adult survey in particular is a pretty gold standard method for collecting information. In Greater Manchester, you get now about 8,500 survey sample for adults and about 6,500 off the top of my head for children and young people. So pretty robust samples of information, okay, which gives us this data, okay? If there's any questions that come up about the process or method of that, you can pick it up as we go along. Okay, I'm going to just define. This is adult data. You're going to see a lot of wiggly worms today. I'm not going to apologize for that. We love a wiggly worm in PressRed. I'm going to talk about those terms on the right-hand side first, active and inactive. Chief medical officers in the UK recommend that adults do 150 minutes of moderate intensity physical activity. I've used that term moderate intensity on purpose. I will come back to it a little later. Okay? If you do 150 minutes, you're in the green dot in Greater Manchester at the top. Okay? If you're doing less than 30 minutes a week, then you're in the red dot at the bottom. Okay? One thing I want you to pay attention to as well as we go through. Data is for GM, Greater Manchester. It says there's a tag on every slide, or all the slides that we need, just telling you what you're looking at, what information you're looking at. So this is GM data, and I'm telling you that because sometimes I'm going to be dropping into some of those locality slides that we've taken from some of the workshops to help you to bring some of this information to life. Now, as you can see, activity, the proportion of adults that are achieving the 150 minutes has gone up from baseline. It's gone up from 59.4 10 years ago to 62.1. That change is statistically significant. Okay, I won't get into the definition of that. That can be something we go over the break, but it matters. That change is happening. It's a real positive thing. Look at what happened in the pandemic. The pandemic pushed it down and we have recovered. Greater Manchester has recovered, which is really positive. Okay, now look at the inactive slide. That's gone down. We want it to go down, right? Gone from 28.5 to 26.9. That's not quite statistically significant at the moment, but it's going in the right direction, and it's particularly going in the right direction since the pandemic, and that change from since the pandemic is statistically significant. So change, positive change in population level outcomes in Greater Manchester is occurring. This is the bit where you should whoop, right, and go, woo, it's happening, right? This is good, this is really good. We don't see this everywhere in the country. It is happening nationally at the moment, at active levels. These things, it shows you beautifully, these go up and down. Of course they do. It's a random sample of adults on an annual basis. You're going to reach different people, you get different answers. But the pattern here is positive. It's going in the right direction. I'm just going to show you how it differs though, because it's quite different across our 10 localities. On the left, you've got active levels and how they've changed. That's the percentage point change. So in Salford, from baseline, it's gone up nearly 10 percentage points, active levels. And in Salford, inactivity has gone down nearly 9 percentage points since baseline. Okay? And you can see with the asterisks where the significant change is being reflected in the different localities. But what you see here is there's quite a difference, right? There is quite a difference between localities. It's not equal. We wouldn't expect it to be equal. And I'm going to get you thinking about that a little bit later, but we wouldn't expect this to be equal, right? All of those places are different. Okay, they'll face different environments, different policies, different topography, different people that live there. They're all different. And I will get you thinking about that a little bit later. Okay, so we wouldn't expect it to be equal, but one of the challenges of that difference in change is that the gap between our least active area in 2017-18 was Rochdale, when 54% of adults was active. The least active area now is Bolton, when 56% of adults are active. But the gap between the least and the highest has got bigger. So it's widening. The gap between localities is widening. Now, the main reason I'm telling you this is because that variance is becoming greater. Okay, we might need to think about any implications of that. But the other reason I'm pointing you towards this is that little line at the bottom. If any of you are familiar with Michael Marmot's work, he talks about how he uses this lovely phrase of how we need the tide to lift everyone. Okay, and what this slide shows you is that everyone is lifting. Because look at the worst, the lowest in Rochdale was 54. The lowest in Bolton now is 56. Okay, so everybody is being lifted up, but some are progressing quicker than others, which is, we'd expect to see that, right? Because the conditions in these different places are quite different. But we do need to just be mindful of it. I'm going to come back to that term moderate intensity now. Why is it in the, anybody know why it's in the recommendation?
It's a minimum level to preserve healthy lives, basically.
Your heart rate. You're right, it's about minimum level. We need to get our heart rate up. Moderate intensity, right? If you're sat there thinking you need to put your Lycra on, like I do, go mountain biking in a full Lycra suit with my, like, over my head, just to make sure I go as quick as possible. I don't do this, by the way. Okay, but it's not that. For the vast majority of people, it's a brisk walk. Some super fit people may have to break into a jog. The elderly and the frail just move. Okay, and your heart rate will be lifted enough. And we need to get heart rates up. Okay, and I'm telling you this because a lot of people are inactive because they're not getting the cardiovascular benefit. Okay, and that's what it shows you. This is an example from Bury, that this is the total number of inactive people, about 40,000 inactive people in Bury, 28,000 are not doing any activity at all. We've got 10,000 in the middle though, that are just missing a heart rate benefit. Okay, they're not doing the exercise at a quick enough rate to lift their heart rate. And the reason why we bring this up with localities is our belief is the tactics for creating change between these two groups. The group at the end are doing between 1 and 29 minutes. The tactics for creating change between those two groups are probably very different. The groups on the right are probably thinking that they're already moving. I like to tell my story about, my office is in the front of the house. Watch these people do this. Buy bigger dogs. That's got to be your next strategy, right? Just get everybody a bigger dog. That's simple. Or cattle prods. That's what I'm used to where I'm from in the Pennines, cattle prods. You don't go down the cattle prods, bigger dogs route, okay? Because they're getting the minutes. They could be out walking those dogs for an hour, twice a day. They think they're getting out, and they're getting all the benefits of being outside and the mental health and they're moving, but they're inactive. Because when they ask the survey, ask them if they get their heart rate up and they get a bit warmer, and they say no. So those group people might be a bit more susceptible to campaigning, helping them realize that they need to get their heart rate up to get real benefits of physical activity. Whereas that group on the left, campaigning is not going to go anywhere. Okay, you probably need to be thinking about other tactics about how you support those people into a movement behavior, movement habit. Now, this is Hazel's fault, this slide. Planted this little seed in our head. It is something that my mate Dave had a look at the other day, okay? We've broken down inactivity by those three groups, okay? The group not doing a lot, the big red bit, not doing any movement at all. The pink bit are those people that are just missing the intensity, and the green bit are those people that are doing between 1 and 29. Now remember that your inactivity rate has gone down, okay, which is good. But look at the proportion of people doing nothing in GM and how that has gone down. And since the pandemic, we are 3 percentage points lower. Remember, the overall change in inactivity is only 1.5, so it's double. Now, you could say, okay, that this is possibly an early warning signal that things are getting interesting and that inactivity is changing, because we've got people out of doing nothing to doing something somewhere else in these outcomes, which is a real positive. And we need to start thinking about some of the data in here and where does it help us tell us that something is afoot. And this is one thing that we might want to try and keep an eye on. Okay, go on.
So an early warning signal.
As in, if we're seeing a decrease in the proportion of people not doing any movement at all, well, will that at some point later down the line show an improvement in activity overall? It's a good thing. Oh yeah, it's a good. It's a warning. I thought, no, it's a good. As in, there's a tsunami.
An
Possibly. I think it's a really positive sign. Inactivity has gone down, but actually, your doing nothing group has got squeezed more than the inactivity overall. Okay, so that's possibly something for us to be having a little think about and having a little look at, and we could break this down demographically and see what it looks like, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Right, children and young people. How many minutes do children and young people need to do for the Chief Medical Officer's recommendation? 60 a day, okay? Or an average of 420 minutes across the week, okay? If you're achieving that in GM, you're in the green dots again. Half the population now was 40% of the children and young people population at baseline. If you're doing less than half an hour a day, you're in the black dots at the bottom, okay? And these are a little bit wobblier. They're wobblier because of the sample. It fluctuates quite a bit compared to the adult sample. But we've got change again, right? These are going in the right direction. This is another time to whoop, whoop. Okay, this is positive. This is really good. We've still got a bit of difference when it comes to looking at how that is playing out over different localities. But you can see some really big changes on here, right? Which is really positive in terms of activity levels. Look at how many of those are statistically significant. I can tell you about that at the break if you're interested in it. Okay, so change is afoot, even if it's not distributed equally across localities, but we wouldn't expect it to be. And again, we have a situation, yes, the gap between those with the lowest and the highest rates might have widened a little bit, particularly on active, but the tide is lifting everyone again, which is good. It's just that the rate of change in some of those areas isn't as good as we'd like it to be, but the tide is lifting everyone, which is quite intriguing. Right, I'm just going to very quickly show you 4 slides just to give you a sense of what's happening in different localities, and then we're going to have a conversation. Let's start with Salford. Okay, anyone live in Salford? One. Oh, hello. Why are we seeing this, Andrew? We're going to come to that in a minute. Don't answer it. We're going to come to that in a minute. Right. What have you seen? Like 10% increase in activity levels, 8% decrease in inactivity levels. Wow. That's really quite intriguing. Okay. So what is going on in Salford, which is what we're going to come back to in a minute. Okay. Let's just have a quick look at Rochdale. Rochdale, smaller change, 4% increase in activity levels, 3% decrease in inactivity levels. Why have I picked on Salford and Rochdale? It's not to do with the activity levels. Well, it partly is. Why have I picked on them?
Different areas?
What is the characteristic about both of those places that a lot of places in GM share?
Deprivation.
They are really quite deprived. Okay. So there's hope again here, right? Because we're seeing change in activity levels in 2 of our really quite deprived boroughs. Now, I think there's very different reasons why we're seeing that, which I'm going to get you thinking about in a minute. But that's hope again, right? Not only are GM as an average levels of inactivity and activity improving, particularly activity, but we're seeing change in localities where deprivation is quite high, especially Rochdale. If that trend can continue, it's going to get very interesting. Okay, Salford's a bit different, and I want you to think about why it's a bit different in a minute or two. I'm just going to go to the other end, though. Oh, jumped too far. Bolton, their relative inactivity's increased, activity levels pretty stable. Bolton's not as deprived as those other 2 areas, which is quite intriguing. Okay. And yet, we're not quite seeing the same. And then we've got Oldham, where things have got worse. Okay. Why have they got worse? Oldham's similar to Rochdale, right? Deprivation-wise, but next door to each other, and yet we've got one going one direction and one going the other direction. Why? That's your question. Sport England, in their infinite wisdom, looked at this data set, got a very good data boffin to look at the data and look at which factors are really significant in terms of experiencing inequality. And they came up with this thing called their inequality metric. And there's 6 individual factors that affect activity levels in a big time, in a significant way for adults. I'm going to go around them. Pregnant women and parents of children under 1. Last time I presented this, I've got a feeling Andrew was about to become a dad. And I started talking about whatever you do, don't have a kid because you're not going to be active anymore. And then see, oh, I'm just about to have a kid. So I'm not going to do that. But if anyone, oh God, how hard is it, right? First child, thing there in a corner. What the bloody hell am I doing with my life? Okay, it's not just pregnant women. It's both parents of children under the age of 1. We see inactivity spike for those people, okay? Disabled people and those living with a long-term health condition, people in lower socioeconomic groups, NSEC 6 to 8, people on lower incomes, okay? NSEC 6 to 8 is another thing I can explain at break time if you want me to. Adults of Muslim faith, people over the age of 65, and people of Asian, Black, and Chinese ethnicity, heritage, okay? But the real challenge comes when you get 2 or more of those characteristics. When you have 2 or more of those characteristics, it really makes a difference to your activity levels. And let me just show you what it looks like in Oldham. This is a slide from Oldham, okay? If you have none of those characteristics, I am in that group. I'm white, British, I'm male. Both my children are well over that, and if my wife's pregnant, I'm going to run away. I don't have a long-term health disability. I'm of no particular faith. I'm not yet 65. And this is how geeky I am. And I should have got you all a badge, actually. I'm NSEC 4. How do I know that? Because that's a national socioeconomic classification for people that are small business owners. I'm a small business owner. So that's what group so I don't fit into the NSEC 6 to 8. Okay, so I have none of those characteristics. In Oldham, 70% of people with none of those characteristics are active. If you've got one of those characteristics in Oldham, it drops down to 53% of people with one of those characteristics are active. Then look at what happens when you've got 2 or more. We're down to 40%. Now, because there's such a prominent Asian community, Pakistani, Bangladeshi in particular in Oldham, we wanted to show what happens if you're Asian and on lower incomes. We couldn't do it in the Oldham data because the sample was too small, so we did it in the GM data. And we're down at 30, this is active levels, right? This is not inactive, this is active levels. We're down to 1/3 of the Asian community that are on lower incomes in Oldham achieving 150 minutes. 1 in 3. Okay, it's quite stark, that, isn't it? And you can start to see how these factors compound each other, affect each other. What does that look like at a GM level? Well, it looks like that. Okay, and you've got that Asian and NSEC, and I'm going to come back to that in a minute. Okay, so it looks like 73, nationally it's 74 by the way, but comparing to England is a bit of a misnomer because GM as a population doesn't look like England. Okay, as simple as that. Again, a question that I can answer at break or later. Okay. 69, that's lower than England. England's 59, 62 nationally, and then 44 when you've got 2 or more characteristics. 42, I think it is nationally off the top of my head. We then got quite interested in the other groups or the other combinations of characteristics that are lower than the 44 average. Okay, so people with a disability and are in lower incomes, 41% are active. People who are Asian and NSEC, I've shown you that already. People with disability and aged over 65, 30%. Okay, so you can see how when you have a combination of these characteristics, it really affects your activity levels. Okay, and the people that have the combinations are very different in different places, right? You'll have more of some groups in one place than they have in the other, and that's certainly at play in some of our locality data. Okay. I'm just going to show you what it looks like for children and young people. There's different characteristics for children and young people. Okay, some of these are tricky. The low affluence one is similar to lower socioeconomic groups. It's not the same because children and young people can't answer the questions that we all answer when we do the census. So we use an affluence score. You've got girls and other agenda, but the other agenda bit is only for secondary age pupils, where it's girls across 5 to 16-year-olds. Okay, you've got Asian and Black heritage, and then you've got this really, really interesting one. Where the children and young people, when they fill in the survey, say that they it's their perceptions of whether they lack space at home or in their community to be active in. Okay? When these 4 characteristics come together, they make a difference to activity levels. This is what it looks like in Wigan, and the black dots are GM. Okay? So in Wigan, if a children and young person has none of those characteristics, 59% is active compared to 43% with 2 or more characteristics. So it affects, these characteristics come together and affect each other and make the situation more challenging. 2+, and then you can start to see we've got challenges with sample size to tease out some of these combinations, which is a bit tricky, but these are 2 that we could show. So we know that children from global majority backgrounds lack a park or a private garden or a perception of green space near them, look at the difference it makes, and then girls, and look at the difference it makes. Okay, and this is where I need you to start thinking about how you get to these and work with these parts of our community. Through our partners, through the interventions that you might oversee, through the investments that you might make, because this is where some of our really challenging, nuggety challenges lie, okay, in these multiple characteristics and where they are. There's one single characteristic that I'm going to just mention because it's where a lot of this work all started, which was around those LDP groups and people experiencing or risk of experiencing worklessness. So I'm pulling you out of the multiple characteristics and just talking about one, okay? And in particular, I'm really interested in that long-term sick or disabled. Because since the pandemic, what has happened to that group? It's grown. Nationally, it's grown. In GM, it's grown. In some of the localities, it's really grown. Okay, and I'm going to come back to that in a minute or 2. Okay, but we have more people that are of working age. Okay, so they're between 16 and 65, but they're economically inactive because of their health. Okay, 2 big drivers of that nationally: mental health conditions, musculoskeletal conditions. There's some really interesting data in Yorkshire where the group that's driving the increase of people that are outside of the workforce is men under the age of 30. Well, that's one of our banker groups for activity, right? And yet we've got more people in that age group falling into economic inactivity. And as soon as you become economically inactive, you are significantly less likely to move, as this shows you. This is inactive, by the way. 61% of people with a long-term health condition are inactive. What's the stat, Haley, that came out of the health blueprint? I'm putting you on the spot now. Can you remember? In GM, if you have been out of work for 2 years or more, you are more likely to die than get back into work. How frightening is that? How frightening is that? Okay, so this group is important, and just show you what that group looks like when you look at, this is inactivity, this is not active levels, this is inactivity levels. Look at the red wiggly worm. This ain't going in the right direction. But what has happened since the pandemic? Well, certainly the most severe cost of living crisis that's happened in my adult life by a country mile. Who's really going to be vulnerable to a cost of living crisis? People that are economically inactive. Okay, so not have we just had a pandemic, a unique, every century or several centuries event. It's been followed by a really significant cost of living crisis. Okay, and remember that pandemic in Greater Manchester was more severe. You were under lockdown for longer periods of time. You were under tighter controls for longer periods of time. So recovering from it, like those active levels earlier, really impressive in one way. Okay. However, some people are getting left behind a little bit. Okay, and understandably so, because that pandemic's been hit by cost of living crisis and poverty, which is where I'm going to go in a minute or 2. A little bit about how our populations are changing. This was the first time we've done I can't remember where Salford was in the list, probably at third or fourth, but it was this slide that made me think, what? And I'm going to start at this end. This is between 2011 census and 2021 census. There's been an 88% growth in global majority communities in Salford. It's nearly doubled in 10 years. Okay, that is quick. That rate nationally is 40%. So the rate of change is double what it is nationally. Okay, Salford is rapidly becoming really quite diverse. Okay, we've also got 60,000 people over the age of 55 now. That's an 11% increase between those two censuses. Okay, we know about that, right? In the sense of baby boomer generation. I'm Generation X, by the way. You should all know your generations, right? We should, again, that could be another badge. Next to your NS set group, you could have your generation underneath it, and we could all introduce each other by our generations. Okay, Generation X, baby boomer generation, the generation before me. Why are they called the baby boomers? Because there's bloody millions of them. Okay, massive. The 60s, right? It's called, whatever you want to refer to the 60s as for a reason, because there was a lot of babies created. Okay, and that generation is now through to the age over 55. Okay, but it's also started dying because we've got some people at the beginning of that generation that are now quite elderly. So we're starting to see the numbers of it decreasing, but it's still huge. Okay, so we've got an aging population. And then we've got more people. 15% increase in the total number of adults in Salford. Again, that rate of change is 7% nationally. Again, it's double. So Salford is getting more people, more diversity, and more older people. By the way, the size of Salford isn't changing. We're putting them into the same space. Okay? You've got to get your head around that, right? What does this mean for our infrastructure? What does it mean for our green space? And how many people there are that lives near a green space? What does it mean for our schools? Children and young people numbers in a lot of the country going down. Birth rates are dropping after the pandemic. We're all scared still. Okay, so we've got this really interesting patterns going on that affect these activity levels. Just going to show you another one. It looks a bit different. I think this is Oldham. Okay, still the patterns are there. They're just not as strong. Okay, we're still getting an increase in numbers of people. We're still getting more older people. And we're still getting greater diversity. Okay, Oldham was starting from a more diverse position to begin with. Okay, so it's really interesting, and those patterns are absolutely at play across. Gone too far. Across GM, that rate of growth is about same as national. 7% more people between the two censuses. 15% growth in the over 55s. 56% increase in global majority communities. I'm going to turn that into a number. Between the two censuses, it's nearly 250,000 people from diverse communities increase. These trends are predicted to continue. So we're halfway through between the last census and this census now, 2021 to 2031. There's going to be another 200,000 people by 2031 in Greater Manchester. So more than we've had in the last 10 years. So what does that mean for how many more older people and how many more people from culturally diverse communities? Our population is really, really changing, and it's quite quick. A couple of other factors before I get you thinking of the next question and having a little break. I've already touched on this. Not just is our population changing, but the pandemic, a really unique, weird experience for everyone, was followed by a cost of living crisis. And that is then flowing through into poverty and how much money we have. This is the data for Oldham, okay? Remember the population of Oldham, the adult population is about, what was it? 180, was it? I can't remember now. That one. 190,000 adults over the age of 16, okay? 40,000 of those adults are claiming universal credit. If you think that those people are not working, you're wrong. They're working. The vast majority of those people are in low-paid work, okay? And claiming credit to be able to get by. and pay the bills. And that has increased 6,500. Okay, so that's 1 in 5 people in Oldham now that are using universal credit to be able to get by. Okay, this matters, right? Because if provision is one of the things that creates minutes for people, how accessible is it? How affordable is it? It matters, okay? Childhood poverty is growing. I'm going to come back to that in a minute or two, okay? That group, long-term sick and disabled, is growing, okay? We've got some quite challenging factors around income that are at play, okay? Especially in places like Oldham. That's why Rochdale's interesting, because some of these factors are at play in Rochdale as well, but we're still seeing change, and we need to try and unpick and keep an eye on that a little bit more over time. Just a little bit more on poverty. This was a bit that Hazel shared with us. It's really quite intriguing. Look at Salford. Economic growth is high, but it's not fair, it's not equally distributed. So where the change is coming from in Salford, we might need to unpick that a little bit more and understand it a bit more and start to think about what it means for some of our communities that have those intersecting characteristics in order to be able to think about who are we reaching, who are we engaging with, who do we need to continue to work with. Okay, but you've had these headwinds, these really quite blustery headwinds, and yet we're still seeing change. Okay, and there's a little bit of me that thinks activity levels probably likely to change before inactivity levels. Can we keep these trends going in the right direction? And that's not you, that's not GM moving the organisation, that is GM moving the movement. Because it's all of us, it's all of those partners, it's everybody that makes a contribution to trying to help different outcomes emerge from the situations that we've got. One last slide, I think. This is healthy life expectancy for women, for the different localities in Greater Manchester. You don't need to try and work out what localities. All you've got to look at is the trend. It's not going in the right direction. But I'd come back to the story, right? That pandemic, and then the cost of living crisis has really made it difficult for a lot of people to live healthy. Healthy life expectancy, by the way, is a modelled bit of information that predicts in each part of the country how long you can live in good health before your first long-term health condition kicks in. Okay, that's what healthy life expectancy is. Then nationally it's 61. So nationally on average, people will hit 61.3 years exactly to the day, and then all of a sudden they get their first diabetes or whatever it might be. It doesn't work like that, does it? But the data is still quite interesting in the sense of we've got decreasing, it's getting lower. Our years in good health is getting lower, and there's a consistent pattern there apart from Salford's quite interesting again, isn't it? That it's not seeing the rapid change maybe that some of the other areas have. Okay, so where much we move is part of this. Okay, all I would say with this data is I've got a big caveat on it. And the details in the source at the bottom. It's rolled up data and it's aggregated data from 2 years. So the change you're seeing now is probably a couple of years ago. And it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next couple of years of data as it's released. But we've got these really interesting headwinds that we're trying to kind of create the change that we want to create. Intersectionality, are we reaching those people that have got multiple factors of inequality? How does a changing population mean to our assets, to our programs, to our investments, to our policy, to our direction of travel? And how do we start to think about some of these health and economic challenges that we know our populations are experiencing? I want you to imagine all of the minutes, nearly all the minutes, I'll come to that in a minute, all of the minutes done in Greater Manchester, or in this particular example in Wigan. Let's go to Wigan. All the minutes done by people in Wigan, okay? And we can organise those minutes into walking for leisure, traditional sport, I'll define that in a minute, walking for travel, fitness activities, gardening, dancing and cycling, okay? So 7 groups. Traditional sport, pretty much everything else that's not in one of those other categories. All your football, all your cricket, Neve. All your cricket, all your tennis, all your rugby league, all your rugby union, all your canoeing, all of your running, all of your swimming, all of that, that's in traditional sport. All your Joe Wicks, Don't smile. We all did it during lockdown, didn't we? Everybody loved Joe Wicks in lockdown. All your Joe Wicks, all your fitness classes, all your going to the gym, all of that, fitness activities. The others are pretty straightforward. What's missing?
Active travel.
Travels in walking for travel and in cycling. It'd be split between the two.
Housework.
Housework and what else? Work. The Active Life survey does not capture data around work, whether that's housework or employed work. And I want you to keep that in your mind when we go on to the next slide, okay? And I'll explain why, okay? But there's some interesting, this is the proportion of minutes, right? So we are getting a lot of minutes from walking. 48% of minutes come from walking in Wigan. Okay, this is the same groups, okay, but now I've split it between people in lower socioeconomic groups and people in higher socioeconomic groups. Lower socioeconomic groups, routine, semi-routine, long-term unemployed, never worked. That's the three groups. What on earth's routine and semi-routine work? Think of labourers, think of people working in shops, on shop floors, think of people on production lines that aren't where they need a technical qualification. I always use the example of unqualified van drivers. I don't mean that they haven't got a driving licence. I mean that they haven't got a technical driving licence that means they can drive a big truck. Okay, we've seen a big growth in that part of our workforce, haven't we? Think of your delivery drivers. Okay, they don't need a special license to do that job. Okay, and that is a big growth. Okay, and they are lower socioeconomic groups. Okay, higher socioeconomic groups. All of your chief executives, all of your doctors, all of your accountants, all of your solicitors, professionally qualified people. Big difference. These people are likely to be higher qualified, better paid. This group, lower qualified, lower paid. Okay, look at the difference in the pattern. Okay, the survey doesn't ask about work. What is the lower socioeconomic part of our community more likely to do? No, that's not on here. But think work. What kind of work? Manual work. My mum used to work on a market stall, and she'd come home, and we lived in the middle of the Pennines. Beautiful. And my dad would say to her, "Fancy taking dog out for a walk?" And she'd tell him in 2 words where to go. She'd stood on her feet all day. Last thing she wanted to do was stand on her feet anymore. This survey doesn't help us understand people's experiences of work and how that then impacts on their activity levels of going and doing something else. I've been saying this for quite a while. We need to try and fill that gap because it's important, especially for some of the people that we are struggling to help achieve these outcomes. Okay, it's a really important thing. But then look at the difference in the patterns, right? Now in Wigan, that traditional sport for the lower socioeconomic groups is quite high, which is good. Okay, in other parts of Greater Manchester, it's not as high as that, contributing as many minutes as that, which is quite interesting. But you also look at how many minutes are now coming from walking and gardening. The vast majority of our minutes, particularly for some of the groups that are less likely to experience movement, come from walking and gardening. It matters. It really matters. And if we had work on here, it'd be quite interesting to think about what that then means for the change that we could create. I'm going to show it you in a slightly different way. Okay, remember that we've got inactive people that have done some movement, but not at the intensity or for the duration that they need to do to get out of the inactive classification of less than 30 minutes. We've now taken all those minutes done by active people, just people that are achieving the outcome, people that are achieving between 30 and 149 minutes in the middle, people that are doing less than 30 minutes, but possibly a lot of light-only minutes. Look how important walking and gardening is to people that aren't moving out of the inactive group. Okay? Look what happens to sport and fitness as you tend to get more active. How much more of a contribution it makes. If we're going to start where people are at, if we're going to start where some of our inactive people are at, where do we need to start? That's not saying that sport, walking, football, some of the products that are available aren't a tool. They are, absolutely they are. Okay? But just think about where some of those people are already getting light-only minutes, what kind of activity they're going to do, how do we help them to think about it a little bit differently? It matters. Everyday movement, the way that we walk around our communities, the way that we garden. By the way, have you seen new houses and how big their gardens are? Well, that's another challenge, right? And we're not going to get gardens bigger, but the way that we think about community spaces and community green is really potentially quite important going forward as we do our planning. I'm going to just show you in a slightly different way. Look at the pandemic year and the aftermath of the pandemic. What it did to walking for leisure. What it did for walking for travel, of course it did. You couldn't go to your sports club. You couldn't go to your gym for significant periods of time. Okay, closed down, then opened up again, and closed down, then opened up again, closed down. Okay, what did that do? We all, like me, took my children out for a walk in the countryside because that was my only way of trying to teach them. And I failed as a teacher. Okay, so these patterns, we see it in the data, the way that things shift over time. Just a little bit on sport before I move on. Top 10 sports for adults in Wigan. What do you notice? This is where I get sad.
No cricket.
One of the 4 biggest, wealthiest governing bodies in the country can't make the top 10 sports participation-wise in Wigan. Interesting, that, isn't it? Interesting. No rugby union. Of course not. It's Wigan, man. Play rugby league up there. Okay. Children and young people. Top 15 sports. What do you notice? No cricket. Sorry? Basketball's popular. Look at the trampolining. And I was thinking, how many trampolining clubs are there in? Oh, no. How many families have got a trampoline in their back garden? Which is quite interesting, isn't it? So these are some of the activities that we've got demand for. How accessible are they? Back to our children and young people that have more than one of those characteristics, living their life with more than one of those characteristics. Right, I'm going to move us on. The other bit that really matters is our environment. Okay, and I'm meaning this in its broadest sense. Because those activities, go back to those 7 categories, walking for leisure, cycling, what a diverse range of environments enables that, right? From our roads and our pavements through to our football pitches, AstroTurf, croquet lawns, table tennis tables. You know, the environment that enables this is really diverse, okay? And it really does matter. Just a little bit about activity levels in Oldham. When we think about some of those IM indices and multiple deprivation, which is some environmental factors are part of that indices. And this is inactivity levels. In our most deprived parts of Oldham, 44% inactive, compared to our least deprived parts of Oldham, 20% inactive. So our environment that we're in and around us shapes us, helps us move or not. Okay, it matters, and I'm going to show you why some of that matters now. Firstly, by taking you into this. This is my favourite pie chart. I love pie charts. I'm a northerner, right? Who doesn't love pie? Okay, what are you looking at? Start in the middle. All of those minutes. Well, 66% of all of the minutes in Trafford are done outside, compared to 34% of minutes done inside, okay? And then we've broken down the different parts of outside and inside. So 47% of all minutes comes in parks, gardens, and on the road. Okay? 2% of all minutes come from specialist leisure and sport facilities outside in Trafford. Okay? Can understand that maybe to a degree. Quite densely populated, you know, there might not be that many facilities. 16% of minutes, countryside and coast, and then you've got the indoor breakdown. Okay, look how big leisure is in Trafford in terms of providing minutes inside. Okay, really quite a significant contribution in Trafford. Now let's look at Oldham. We had to put 2 years of data together for Oldham to do this for Oldham, not because of the sample size, but just because we couldn't believe the results. Okay, look in the middle. 84% of all minutes in Oldham done outside. Wow. 75% nationally. That is, in the latest year of data, it's over 90% of all minutes are done outside. Okay? Look how small the slither of indoor is. Our environment contributes to our minutes in very, very different ways. Okay, and the more we get our head around that, one of the things that we're trying to tease out, because it's come out particularly in the work that we're doing in Merseyside, is just how much of a contribution does parks make? Because that would enable colleagues to have conversations with their parks team about just how important those spaces are, that we protect them, and especially in some of the areas where they might be under threat, because we want to make our places even more densely populated, and we're losing parks. Okay, they are really, really important. And I'm getting really quite niche now, but I really want to tease out how many minutes are done on playing pitches. Grass playing pitches. I'd really love to be able to get into perspective just how much attention we need to pay to some of these assets. Because some assets, like our roads and our pavements and our parks, and they're really important and maybe might not get the same kind of attention as other parts of this kind of scenario. I'm going to move you on. Okay, this is Oldham. Dodgy colours, it's not my fault, I think it's a projector. I'm going to blame the projector anyway. But that is the whole of Oldham underneath there. The darker the colour, the higher the level of inactivity in Oldham. Okay, so if you look at the really darkest colour, we're up to over 40%. Okay, and we've drawn their 5 neighbourhood priority areas on there. Okay, they gave us these boundaries, and now I'm going to focus on that west bit. Okay, and you can see that the middle bit of the west bit, the bit that's more central to Oldham, is really high levels of inactivity and a little bit lower to the bottom towards the M60 as it is. Okay, I'm just going to show you some of the assets in this space. This is when I got really carried away when I saw this map, because it took me back, and I'm going to tell you that story in a minute. So this is the same area with the asset base on there. There's little patches of green space on there, isn't there? Worth Cricket and Bowling Club, going to come back to that in a minute. Worth Park, Rugby League Club, Coleshaw Green Park, Yew Tree Community, whatever that green space is by Yew Tree Community School. Okay, and then you've got some things out of the area that are not too far away. Okay, I'm going to say one thing. There's probably about 15,000 people or more living in that little patch.
It's where I grew up.
It's where Beth grew up. Okay, it's where I had one of my favourite cricketing experiences, watching Carl Hooper absolutely annihilate my team's bowling. And he hit about 150 off, I don't know, night ball. It blew my mind as a 14-year-old that you could play cricket like that. Okay, so I know that cricket club. Or I did 30 years ago. Don't know it now. Anyway, I asked in the room about Worth Cricket Club, and we're going to come back to it in a minute when I've shown you in the next couple of slides. Okay, so now you've got the density of the Asian population on this side, and the levels of inactivity estimated amongst the Asian population on this side. You can see we're up to quite high. We're up to nearly 50%, 40, 50% in that population, where it's really densely populated Asian community. Okay, Pakistani and Bangladeshi in particular. Okay, now remember where the assets were. Worth Cricket Club is pretty much underneath that 84. You can see where the 2 roads meet, just above the 72 where the park was. And then you've got the Rugby League Club in that pale blue, just off to the left in that little nook. Okay, that's where our green space assets are. Okay. This is some analysis by the Friends of, the Fields in Trust, where they look at population density and how much accessible green space is available to the community. To be green, you've got to have more than 2.4 hectares of green space per 1,000 people. If you're red, you haven't got that. Okay, and that's their minimum recommendation of how much accessible green space there should be for 1,000 people. We're nowhere near it in this part of Oldham. Nowhere near it. It is very urbanised. So those green spaces, that cricket club, that park, that rugby club, become really important, right? Not just because they offer cricket and rugby and whatever the park offers, but because they're the only green spaces or significant green spaces in that local community. Let me just show you some data in a slightly different way. This is all green space. This includes all private gardens, all private owned green space. Some analysis done by Friends of the Earth. Where it says Chadderton West, that orange and red bit is the part of the community that we are looking at in a bit more detail. And what's this telling us? There's actually very little green space, full stop there. Okay? Gardens might have become yards, might not have existed in the first place because they're terraced houses, Beth. They're really densely populated terraced houses with yards, not gardens. Okay, so what does that then do to our gardening minutes? Gets rid of them. You don't have to do what I had to do when I hit the age of whatever I was when I bought a house and had a garden, and all of a sudden, several times a year, I find myself incidentally collecting minutes doing this. Okay, that doesn't happen. Those minutes aren't there. Okay, so what does that mean for the cricket club, the rugby club, and the park that are some of our green spaces right in where our need is? They become really important. So I asked at the workshop, what's the cricket club like? Because I'm hoping it's diverse, right? And the response I got was, yeah, it is diverse. The playing membership is diverse. It's not run by people from the local community. It's still run by white British people that don't live around there anymore. I was like, well, why is that? And the feedback that I got was, well, the clubhouse has a bar. People of Muslim faith don't want to go into the room, which is where all the meetings occur, to be part of the committee or to volunteer and get involved in it. And so they're not getting involved in running the club. Okay, and I was like, wow. But we can't get rid of the bar. Why? Because it's the main income source that keeps the club going. Now, that's a cricket challenge, right? I'm more interested in, that is one of the few green spaces in one of our densely populated parts of Oldham. It's got to do more than cricket. Full stop. It has to. So how do we create that change? And how do we get some of the people that are living locally in the positions of power and control that might think differently about what that club and that asset could do? Sadly, the story for the rugby club was a bit different. It's still serving the white British community that does live some close by, but it serves a broader patch. My point is, these assets can't be one-dimensional anymore. They really can't. Not when our population is that densely populated in a certain pattern. And that pattern occurs in quite a lot of places. You can see it in Eccles. You can see it in the centre of Rochdale. You see that pattern time and time again. So the way that we engineer different urban spaces and how we make them relevant to the different groups that are experiencing inequality, it becomes really important. You remember, we've spent a little bit of time sitting with the problem over the last kind of hour or so, but remember, change is occurring. And it's in changes occurring in some of the places that we might not expect it to be occurring, which I think is a real positive. Okay, and how do we keep nurturing those conditions for that to continue to emerge and more widespread? Remember the tide. There are some nice little signals there that the tide is lifting everybody. That bottom end of this has got a bit higher, which is really positive. So that's a good starting point. We've got some work to do around these compounding inequalities. Okay, I'm not just saying that like it's a unique thing to Greater Manchester. You look at the national data, it's exactly a similar set of patterns. Okay, especially in that ethnicity income space. Okay, that's where we've got some work to do. And trying to work that through, I think, is quite important. Our places, our assets, the physicality of our neighbourhoods is really important. I've nicked a term on there, playful. I'm putting in commas around greener. We're not going to make Oldham, the centre of Oldham, greener, folks. Let's just accept that to a degree. We might do some interesting stuff like they're doing in Manchester, right? Okay, but it's not going to make a massive deal that it's all a lot greener. That's not going to happen. But can we make our urban environment more playful? I've nicked that from a net in Tameside, and I think it's a lovely way of thinking about it. If none of you have been to Bradford recently, go and look at what they've done to the centre of Bradford. Okay, they put a massive urban park in the middle of it and chucked all the cars out. So there's some really interesting shifts around how we think about our urban environment that we need to be getting our head around. Okay, and then we really do need to think about that example I used from Worneth Cricket Club. It's not acceptable that we're 40 years on and girls are allowed in cricket club and we've got our local community in there, but they're not in power. They've not got control about how that asset base could be used among. But at the same time, you take that bar away and you've got a problem. So some of those are quite tricky things to work through, aren't they? Some of those are quite interesting to think about how we do our asset development and our investment into facilities to try and make that look a little bit different. Thank you very much for listening.